Good morning. My name's Tom Fresh. I'm your host for the next hour. Thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to the broadcast, and I hope you enjoy the information, or at least you are educated by the information we're bringing to you this morning. We're continuing in the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, and we left off yesterday talking about the role of Freemasonry during this period of time up into and beyond the time of the suppression of the Jesuit order, this Sun Tzuan ruse in order to make it appear to all the world that the Jesuit order was not a factor. And we were talking about the deist constituent of Freemasonry. Freemasons, first of all, before we discuss deism, I want to tell you that, and we'll bring it up later when we study the book, Code Word Babylon, where he quotes Albert Pike that Freemasonry is Luciferianism. Freemasonry is the worship of Lucifer, and that is known by the higher degrees of Freemasonry. But Freemasonry is deistic. Deism. The worship in any of any and all gods. I'm going to bring us back to a quote, if I can find it here. Here it is. He says, "Nowhere was deism more methodically practiced than around the altars of Freemasonry. As the great Masonic scholar Albert Pike put it, here, wrote Pike in his influential Morals and Dogma, published in 1871, quote, listen to this, the Christian, the Hebrew, the Muslim, the Brahmin, the followers of Confucius and Zoroaster can assemble as brethren and unite in prayer to the one God who is above all gods," unquote. Now, for my Bible-believing listeners, you know that's a bunch of gobbledygook. But that accurately describes Freemasonry, that one can be in communion as a brother Mason with any other religious faith, even that of Satanism, open Satanism. All they have to do is acknowledge a supreme deity. And that's what Freemasons do. Technically, it's deism. But there is but one God, and the worship of any other God is Satanism. Call it by any of its various names, every possible permutation of Satanism there is, there's but one truth. Truth is a singularity. And the Creator and Christ, the Son, the Father and the Son, are the Godhead whom I serve and whom I preach. And but Freemasons are a little bit like G.W. Bush. You know, there are many pathways to God. And so says Billy Graham. And so says all the great Protestant leaders today. All have one thing in common. They're Freemasons. And they're deists. Luciferian. But it says, here's a quote. Now remember, we're going to discuss deism here. And here's the quote. It says, "The Freemason does not pretend to dogmatic certainty, nor vainly imagine such certainty attainable. He considers that if there were no written revelation, he could safely rest the hopes that animate him and the principles that guide him on the deductions of reason and the convictions of instinct and consciousness. He studies the wonders of the heavens, the framework and revolutions of the earth, the mysterious beauties and adaptations of animal existence, the moral and material constitution of the human creature, so fearfully and wonderfully made, and is satisfied that God is. So, the first clause of the first sentence says again, the Freemason does not pretend to dogmatic certainty. Now, the Bible believer believes the Bible. The Bible is the basis for all spiritual teaching. And the Bible is known by Bible believers as to be the only source of truth. Remembering that truth is a singularity. There are not many permutations of truth. Truth stands alone. And the Bible teaches but one truth. And that is regarded by deists as dogmatic certainty. And they reject that. And therefore they reject the Scriptures. And that you'll find common in every form of Luciferian worship, whether they call it deism or Catholicism or Hinduism or Shintoism or Buddhism or whatever. The Bible is just a book written by men. It's just their interpretation, and it does more to bind men than to free, according to them. And that basically defines Freemasonry. They believe the only requirement to being a Freemason is that you must be free. In other words, you can't be a slave, and you must believe in a divine entity. Call him by whatever name you will. Those are the only two requirements to be a Freemason. So, with the understanding that deism describes the teaching of Freemasonry, deism also describes Luciferianism, and that they reject the Bible, and that they use nature as the teacher. The deists believe that God, by whatever name he is described, created the heavens and the earth, but then he removed his influence from it. And it exists under the laws which he established for it. And he never intervenes. He never makes revelations. He never interferes in the affairs of men. And that for man to know God is to know nature. It's called the natural law to a deist and to a Freemason. So many times that I've talked to Freemasons on amateur radio, they don't believe the Bible is the Word of God. And they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, nor that he rose from the dead. They believed he lived, that he was a man and a teacher. Good as he may have been, he was not the Son of God, because God doesn't intervene in the affairs of mankind. Can you imagine a Bible-believing Christian being a Freemason in good conscience? It can't be done. Anyway, now we'll continue after having briefly discussed what deism is. It says, most of the philosophers, including Frederick the Great, the Protestant king of Prussia, who subsidized the entire encyclopedia project, were deistic brethren. Now, what does that tell you about these quote-unquote Protestant kings? Particularly Frederick the Great, the Protestant king of Prussia. Could he be a deist? No, not if he's Protestant. Not if he's truly Christian. So we have to, when we use the word Protestant, we have to define the term. Because there are many permutations of Protestantism. And this one happens to be a deist. And by my definition of Protestantism, and probably by yours and most of my listeners, unless you're a Freemason, Protestantism excludes deism. Deism is not part of the equation of Protestantism. But nonetheless, this Protestant king of Prussia, Frederick the Great, And all of those philosophs that produced the Encyclopedia Project were deistic brethren. He says, as were the high-placed government officials who pushed for the disestablishment of the Jesuits. All the Bourbon monarchs employed as their official advisors, quote, ardent members of the lodge, unquote, to use Professor Malachi Martin's phrase, ardent members of the lodge. So we have Protestant Freemasonry, more accurately described as deism, or truly described as Luciferianism. It says the Marquis de Pombal of Portugal was a Mason. Charles III's advisor, the Count de Aranda, Louis XV's Minister de Tillet, and the Duke de Choiseul, as well as Maria Theresa's Prince von Kaunitz and Gerard von Swieten, all belong to the secret brotherhood. They're talking about Freemasonry, the secret brotherhood. It says, since it was no secret that the Enlightenment aimed to make Roman Catholicism passé, Pope Clement XII promulgated in 1728 the Constitution In Enementi, which appeared to condemn Freemasonry thusly. Condemnatio Societatis de Conventio Colorum. The Freemasons, under the penalty ipso facto incurred, or excommunication, absolution from it being reserved to Pontifex Maximus. Freemasons of whatever sect or religion, confederate together in a close and inscrutable bond, according to secret laws and orders agreed upon between them, and bind themselves as well by strict oath taken on the Bible as by the imprecations of heavy punishments to preserve their mysteries with inviolable secrecy. The great mischiefs which generally accrue from secret bodies are antagonists to civil and canonical laws. Talking about the Roman Catholic canon law here. Wherefore, by the advice of the cardinals and of our mere motion, and from the plenitude of the apostolic power, you know, the Pope loves to preach his plenitude of apostolic power. He says, we do condemn and prohibit the meetings of the above-named Society of Freemasons. We strictly command that no one under any pretext or color dare to presume to promote, favor, admit, or conceal in their houses members of the assemblies of this abominable order, nor in any way aid or assist in their meeting in any place, or to administer medicine to them in their sickness, or in any manner directly or indirectly, by themselves or others, afford them counsel or help in their hour of trial and affliction, or persuade others to join said order. It's a mouthful, right? So the Pope Clement XII went out of his way in 1728 to condemn as heresy, proclaiming ipso facto excommunication for Catholics to belong to Freemasonry or to support a Freemason in any way. It's the most thorough condemnation of Freemasonry that I've ever seen in print from the Roman Catholic Church. I was aware that they forbid Catholics to be members of Freemasonry, but here it is in this book, Rulers of Evil. And it says, while Eminente's, speaking of Pope Clement XII, while Eminente's stern rhetoric, which was renewed by Benedict XIV in 1751, seems to dig a wide ocean between Catholicism and Freemasonry, its fruits tell another story. Why, for example, were the Bourbon monarchs, all of them Roman Catholic, never penalized or excommunicated for admitting, promoting, and favoring Masonic advisors. And why, a decade after Marquis de Pombal had shipped the Jesuits out of Portugal, did Clement XIV send an appeasing nuncio to the Portuguese court, elevate Pombal's brother to bishop, and confirm all Pombal's nominees in bishoprics? The answer, of course, is contained in the bull's title, which provides that absolution from penalties or excommunication is reserved to Pontifex Maximus. So, this is a pick and choose example. Generally speaking, Freemasonry is forbidden to the Catholic laity, but those who may use Freemasonry for the benefit of the Roman Catholic Church may be handled on a case-by-case basis by the papacy. It's not a universal condemnation of Freemasonry, it's a select condemnation of Freemasonry. The author writes, that is to say, associating with the abomination of Freemasonry, if done for a cause valuable to the papacy, such as weakening the Jesuits to the point of everybody's assuming they're no longer a threat to Protestantism, says the author, will be absolved by the papacy. Given historical context, does any other answer make sense? The leading Jesuit bashers were not only Freemasons, they were also the product of Jesuit learning against learning. It was the ratio studiorum, the Medici Library's Gnostic wisdom absorbed in the ambience of casuistry, equivocation, mental reservation, and obedience of the understanding, combined with smatterings of Holy Scripture, usually filtered through the commentaries of church doctors, that had turned 2 centuries of Jesuited students into secular philosophers. The ratio studiorum dictated the form and scope of the encyclopedia, which in turn codified the Enlightenment paradigm, whose deistic litany was preached around the altars of Freemasonry. Hold Freemasonry up to the light, and you cannot help but see the black papacy's watermark. Isn't it reasonable, given the circumstances, that the G in the center of the familiar Masonic emblem represents the initial Jesu, the resident of the Black Pope, at the Jesuits' headquarters at number 5 Borgo Santo Spiritu in Rome? Freemasons wouldn't suspect this, nor would Jesuits. It would be information reserved uniquely to the unknown superior who shares what he knows with no one. Quote, your enemies will serve you without their wishes, said Sun Tzu, or even their knowledge. So the author is clearly suggesting that Freemasonry functions largely to serve the Jesuit order, and those who occupy the brotherhood of Freemasonry have not a clue who controls them at the top. And like Sun Tzu, the Jesuit general uses his enemies to do his bidding without their even knowing it. And Freemasonry is going to function large in the upcoming fomentation of the Revolutionary War and the creation of this constitutional republic. And Freemasonry is going to function largely on both sides of the conflict, both in Protestant Great Britain and in the colonies. Jesuitism will never be suspected because out of all of this, during this time, the Jesuits apparently, for all intents and purposes, appear to be a non-factor. It says Freemasonry was the natural, the reasonable, and the only intelligent way for the Roman Catholic Church to control A, the ongoing affront to Protestantism, B, the increase in divine right kings heading their own national churches independent of Vatican control, and C, the incredible explosion of international mercantilism. Like the aquatic creature whose mouth resembles a comfortable resting place for its prey, the lodges were a sagacious recycling of the old Templar infrastructure into a dynamic spiritual and economic brotherhood that gave Protestants, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, agnostics, and anyone else an opportunity to build a better life outside of Roman Catholicism, yet still under the Roman Catholic Church's superintending eye. For Sun Tzu said, quote, "The general sees all, hears all, does all, and in appearance is not involved with anything," unquote. The Jesuit general is the disembodied eye substituted for the pyramid's missing capstone, the stone the builders rejected. That's a reference to the icon on the dollar bill, the pyramid. And where a normal capstone would be placed, the tip-top point, the last stone at the top of the pyramid, is replaced with an all-seeing eye. And that papacy implies that that represents the Jesuit general, the all-seeing eye. It says the lodge's secrecy and its condemnation by the church were essential to sustaining the integrity of both institutions. And so the deepest Masonic secret, the secret that not even their grandest masters could penetrate, was that all their secrets were known to one man alone, the superior general of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order. This should not surprise anyone aware of how thoroughly Freemasonry is suffused with Jesuitic technique. Both Freemasonry and the Society of Jesus are A, humanist religious orders, B, secretive, C, fraternal, D, socially conscientious and politically active, questing, like Aeneas, the prototypical Roman, for the greatest good, for the greatest number. Both orders, E, hold tradition, reason, and experience in equal, if not greater, esteem than the Bible. F, employ carefully structured programs of Gnostic visualization to achieve an ever-increasing knowledge of the divine. G, condone the ends justify the means, the end justifies the means, and H, require absolute obedience, secured by a blood oath, to a hierarchy of superiors, culminating in the Jesuit general, whose orders are so wisely suited to the recipient that they are obeyed as though willed by the recipient himself. That's Freemasonry, a mirror image of Jesuitism. And we'll continue with the reading of the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy when we return from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update. Please stay tuned.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the Inquisition Update. Please subscribe. Gain access to the archives. Listen at your leisure. We're a listener-supported network, and we depend upon your subscriptions and your generosity to keep these programs on the air. If you like Inquisition Update, send a note with your check. Now, returning to the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, we've just made a stunning comparison between Jesuitism and Freemasonry, similar in almost all respects. And the author continues now. He says, the first recorded member of American Freemasonry was Daniel Cox, who was constituted provincial Grand Master of the provinces of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania on June 5th, 1730, on a deputation granted by the Duke of Norfolk, Grand Master of Masons in England. Evidently, Cox was an industrious recruiter. Minutes of a meeting of the Grand Lodge of London in January 29th of 1731 reflect that, quote, Cox's health was proposed and drank as Provincial Grand Master of North America, unquote. So they made him Provincial Grand Master of North America, this Daniel Cox. And that's news to me. But the first recorded member of Freemasonry in the United States was Daniel Cox, and he was made by the Grand Lodge of England to be the Provincial Grand Master of North America, Daniel Cox. It says Daniel Cox was actually a junior, according to Sidney Hayden's Washington and his Compeers, issued in 1868. He was, quote, the son of Dr. Daniel Cox of England, who was a physician to the Queen of Charles II, unquote. Dr. Cox must be presumed a Roman Catholic sympathizer, as both Charles and his queen were Catholics. The Queen Catherine of Braganza, that is Portugal, flaunted a huge Vatican entourage for which she was continually harassed by death plots. Charles converted to Catholicism in exchange for money. There's your simony again. Catholicism is defined by simony. Charles converted to Catholicism in exchange for money from Louis XIV of France under the terms of the Treaty of Dover. The junior Daniel Cox deserves wide recognition as an American visionary, or at least the sole apologist of some undisclosed visionary. An apologist of some undisclosed visionary. Another reference to the Jesuit general. It says 13 years before Benjamin Franklin's proposal of a colonial union to the Albany Congress of 1754, for which Benjamin Franklin was credited with being the first to suggest a, quote, United States, unquote, Cox published in England a dissertation promoting a scheme to settle, quote, an extensive tract of country lying on the Gulf of Mexico, unquote, owned by his father, the Queen's physician. The dissertation, entitled A Description of the English Province of Carolina by the Spaniards called Florida and by the French Louisiane, promoted the elder Cox's tract as an English province allied with New England against the Spanish, French, and Indians. It called for, quote, all the colonies appertaining to the Crown of Great Britain on the northern continent of America to be united under a legal, regular, and firm establishment over which a lieutenant or supreme governor may be constituted and appointed to preside on the spot, to whom the governors of each colony shall be subordinate, unquote. With this union of governments under one president, Cox foresaw, quote, a great council of general convention of the states of the colonies to meet together, consult, and advise for the good of the whole. These United States would provide for their mutual defense and safety, as well as, if necessary, for the offense and invasion of their enemies, unquote, independently of the protections of the British Crown. Interesting. Independently of the protections of the British Crown. Of course, these imaginings became reality 40 years later with the fulfillment of Lorenzo Ricci's strategy for dividing the British Empire. What he's talking about is the Revolutionary War. No longer would the British Empire be used to describe Great Britain and the colonies here in America. Lorenzo Ricci had a strategy for dividing the British Empire, dividing the colonies from Great Britain. Considering the elements involved, lands owned by the Catholic Queen's physician, lands managed and promoted by the physician's son, who was a Freemason, deputed to generate an American Brotherhood of the 8th Duke of Norfolk, who himself was a member of England's premier Roman Catholic family, Cox's dissertation appears to be the earliest formatting of the colonial conscience to divisive thinking by agents of the Black Papacy. The Duke of Norfolk, Grand Master of Masons in England, was also known as Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel. His nephew, Henry Lord Arundel, occupied Wardour College near Tisbury in Wiltshire at the time of Clement XIV's disestablishment of the Jesuits. We shall see how in the autumn of 1773 it was Lord Arundel's castle that John Carroll repaired when civil authorities closed down the Jesuit school at Liège, Belgium, where Carroll had been teaching. So during the suppression, John Carroll lost his job and sought refuge there, obviously. And it says for a year, John Carroll stayed at Wardour, serving as the Arundel family tutor and chaplain before sailing for America to participate in the Revolution. John Carroll was a Jesuit priest. And it says 33rd degree Masonic scholar Manly P. Hall. Now this is important. Please pay close attention to this. This is one of the most quotable quotes in this entire book. This is an important segment of this book. It says, 33rd degree Masonic scholar Manly P. Hall, in his Gnostic extravaganza entitled Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy, issued in 1988, remarked that, quote, not only were many founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose known only to the initiated few. That's Manly P. Hall, one of the greatest authorities in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. In his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, says that not only were many of the founders of the United States Freemasons, but they received aid from a secret and august body. An august body existing in Europe. He's speaking about the Jesuits. He's speaking about the Jesuits. That the Freemasonic founders of this country received aid from the Jesuits who were helping them to establish this country, the United States of America, for a peculiar and particular purpose known only to the initiated few. Now I'm going to stop and wax biblical on you here. We've had Bill Hughes on the program lately to talk specifically about Revelation chapter 13 and to talk specifically about the United States being mentioned in Revelation chapter 13 and what Revelation chapter 13 reveals about the United States. And if you listen to those broadcasts, you know that the United States is regarded as that second beast that rose up out of the wilderness. The first beast being the one who rose up out of the sea, the populated areas of Europe. The second beast being that rose up out of the sparsely populated United States of America. That's the United States in Bible prophecy, the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. And it is this second beast that causes all the world to worship the first beast, the papacy. And here we have in F. Tupper Saucy's book telling us that the founding fathers of this country had a specific purpose, a peculiar and specific purpose for this country, and that they received secret aid from an august body existing in Europe, which can mean none other than the Jesuit order. Do you see the connection? This is confirming in history what the Bible tells us in Bible prophecy, that the United States' specific and peculiar purpose in the world, with the help of the Jesuits, with the direction of the Jesuits, would be to bring the rest of the world, not only itself, but the rest of the world, to worship the first beast, the papacy. And if you've been following Inquisition Update for very long, you know that's precisely what's taking place. The Jesuits have control of our government. They're not even too timid about talking about it anymore. I mean, this isn't a hard sell to somebody that's paying attention. All the Jesuit advisors in our government, and they can have only one purpose for being so preeminent in our government, and that is to use our government to do what the Jesuits were commissioned to do, and that is to create a one-world government with the papacy at its head, to bring the whole world to heel to the papacy's temporal and spiritual authority, the biblical Antichrist authority in the world, to create a global government under the headship of the Pope, a global union of church and state. And the author continues, he says, most histories of the American government skim over the Masonic presence. Americans like their history told in high-definition icons of good and evil, liberty and tyranny, heroism and treason, might and right. They won't buy a heritage polluted by dark spots of mystery. Yet the greater part of American governmental heritage is almost wholly mysterious. The man best qualified to become our country's greatest historian, certainly the man with the most complete access to primary sources in the revolutionary cause, was Charles Thompson, an authentic classical scholar, a discreet Protestant steeped in Medici learning. Thompson was known as, quote, perpetual secretary of the Continental Congress. He inscribed minutes of every congressional session from 1774 until the ratification of the Constitution in 1789. With William Barton, a Freemason, he designed the Great Seal of the United States of America. The choice of its Virgilian mottos is credited exclusively to Thompson. Among his contemporaries, Charles Thompson's name was synonymous with truth. So accurate were his minutes of Pennsylvania's negotiations with the Delaware Indians that the Delawares called him Wegwam-la-Moend, or the man who walks the truth, or the man who talks the truth, When he would take his daily reports of congressional proceedings to the streets, eager mobs would cry, "Here comes Charles Thompson! Here comes the truth!" Once the Constitution was ratified, Charles Thompson retired to Harriton, his country home in Bryn Mawr. He destroyed his personal papers related to the creation of the new republic. An article by Kenneth Boiling in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography of 1976 says that Thompson actually wrote a lengthy history of the Revolution, which he also destroyed. Thompson biographer J. Edward Hendricks of Wake Forest suggests a fate other than destruction, alluding to, quote, persistent rumors that Thompson's papers are in the Pennsylvania Masonic records, unquote. And the author adds in parentheses, Professor Hendricks assured me personally that numerous inquiries have failed to reflect Thompson's membership in Pennsylvania Freemasonry. And he says whether Thompson destroyed his history or surrendered it to the crypt of secrecy, it is clear that he knew there were certain elements in the formation of American government that must must be ignored. Quote, if the truth were known, he told his friends darkly, many careers would be tarnished and the leadership of the nation would be weakened, unquote. And so Charles Thompson occupied the remaining 40 years of his life translating the Septuagint, the Greek language Bible, into English. Still, he was frequently requested to write the definitive insider's history of the Revolution. Dr. Benjamin Rush overheard Thompson reply to one of these requests and recorded it in his diary. Listen to what he says. No, he said, I ought not, for I should contradict all the histories of the great events of the Revolution and show by my account of men, motives, and measures that we are wholly indebted to the agency of Providence for its successful issue. Let the world admire the supposed wisdom and valor of our great men. Perhaps they may adopt the qualities that have been described to them, and thus good may be done. I shall not undeceive future generations, unquote. What I believe Thompson was meaning to say is simply that no historical account of the American Revolution can be truthful unless it discloses the role played by the, quote, agency of Providence, unquote. Notice that Thompson does not use the word providence alone, which was understood in his day to mean God or Christ. He does not say, quote, we are wholly indebted to God, or we are wholly indebted to Christ, but rather to the agency thereof. If Thompson knew the word agency was a synonym for vicar, and I can't imagine that a professional linguist wouldn't, and if he knew that the popes had been called vicars of Christ since the 5th century, and I can't imagine that a biblical scholar of his quality wouldn't, then Thompson was most likely saying, quote, we are wholly indebted to the vicar of Christ, that is, the Roman papacy, unquote. But what a ridiculous statement to the post-revolutionary American mindset. Who would have believed such an outrageous notion coming from even the man who talks the truth? The embattled, degenerate, dying papacy could not possibly have affected the revolution. Anyone foolish enough to run with this idea would have crashed headlong into a wall of ridicule. For Thompson, there was no future in telling what he knew. Since he chose not to undeceive future generations, the American people have lived according to histories that can be contradicted by truth. They have been served by careers and leaders that truth could tarnish and weaken. They seem comfortable in their deception, which is always the case among consenting objects to Roman rule. They seem comfortable in their deception, which is always the case among consenting subjects to Roman rule. Powerful last statement. Well, I'm not comfortable to live under Roman rule, and I'm not comfortable to believe a lie. And I'm not comfortable believing that 52 of the 56 signers of our Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, and that had no consequence for this country. And especially not when P.D. Stewart, in his book Code Word Babylon, clearly lays it forth that when the Jesuits were suppressed in 1773, they found refuge in Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a professor of Roman Catholic canon law at Ingolstadt University, and he created the Bavarian Illuminati as an underground for the Jesuits to take refuge And it's clear, at least from the research that I've been reading, that when they went underground in the Bavarian Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt, they resurfaced in Freemasonry in this country at about the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, or the Revolutionary War, rather. And I know this is a contentious debate, and I've hesitated to take sides, and my research isn't complete into this subject. But F. Tupper Saucy has worked an equation that I find difficult to refute. It's logical. There's too much evidence to support it, to just discard it as absurd. Were our founding quote-unquote fathers, were they really fathers in the Catholic sense? Were they patriotic Protestants? Or were they Jesuitized Freemasons working for the Pope? Now, some people are going to accuse me, Tom, you're trying to tell the American people that the Catholics, that the Vatican has rightful claim to this country. No, I'm not. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The world belongs to Christ, not the papacy. The papacy has no legitimate authority in the world. I'm never going to be confused about that issue. And if the papacy has no authority in the world, no rightful authority in the world, then no matter what machinations they used or didn't use to get control of this country, either at the Revolution or now, in the year 2010, they have no right. They have no divine right to rule the earth. They have no divine right to rule in this United States, nor to bring the rest of the world to their feet. And no matter what side I take in this issue, Christ is the truth. That's all we have for today. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for Nicholas Arthur's Cross the Border. You've been listening to Inquisition Update, and we'll see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.